Great.
Is that good?
Good.
Is this in the way?
Good,
Okay.
good.
Okay. Then I had to ideate concepts for the design involving multiple rounds of sketching, and then I 3D modeled the concept design of the headset. For the NeuroXer headset, I was not starting from scratch. I was brought on board to the project to improve an existing headset design that students before me had previously worked on. The work brought us so far, but nonetheless, a lot had to change. As such, we have this laundry list of issues that needed to be addressed, but it does not even cover all of the adjustments and changes that were required in the process. The headset needed to be redesigned for a sleeker, more unified appearance. Skin electrode holders needed to be redesigned for better skin contact. Dry electrode brackets that make contact with the scalp needed increased linear travel and needed to be easier to assemble. A size adjustment mechanism needed to be added to the design to allow for one-size-fits-all functionality. The electronics compartment needed to be smaller and wiring had to be neater. The headset also needed some cushioning for comfort. And then the entire design needed to be optimized for 3D printing, more so out of FDA-approved materials. For research methods, I familiarized myself through literature review of published research in scholarly journals. Concussions commonly cause vestibular impairment after injury, and the VOMS assessment, which stands for Vestibular Oculomotor Motor Screening, is an assessment to test for concussion, and it involves manual visual testing and feedback in 5 domains, being smooth pursuit, horizontal and vertical saccades, convergence, horizontal vestibular ocular reflex, and visual motion sensitivity. Evaluating a patient's vestibular function directly via EEG is quite tricky, since part of the brain where vestibular function is centralized is very multimodal, being involved in various functions of the brain and the body, some of which being empathy, perspective taking, and the sensation of body ownership. What I also learned is that vestibular function and eye movements are closely linked in the vestibular ocular reflex. Thus, evaluation of eye movements can be indicative of impairment in vestibular function. And in order to monitor eye movements, we can do it either through EOG or with direct eye tracking, which I will talk about more shortly. So in order to incorporate the functionality of visual testing and monitoring of eye movements, as well as EEG for monitoring any irregularities in brain activity into a headset, I also looked into some existing and emerging technologies. VR serves as an ideal method to administer the visual testing of VOMS, since it can display a virtual environment devoid of any visual distractions. And recent advances in the Oculus Quest 2 and Huawei VR Glass allow for standalone VR systems that are more compact and slimmer than ever before. Video nystagmography, or VNG, involves direct eye tracking via infrared cameras to evaluate eye movements and assess the vestibular function. And BrainScope is a new device on the market that places EEG electrodes on the forehead to detect for traumatic brain injury. These technologies set the precedence for the functionality and concussion headset design. Furthermore, my research also involved 3D modeling in CAD and Gravity Sketch and SolidWorks, prototyping and material testing for 3D printing, and user testing to verify functionality and perception, pictured left, which I will now cover. So for the concussion headset, I started out with a simple model of my concept, which I then revised and fleshed out with more detail. It consists of a VR display like an Oculus, combined with eye tracking cameras, which is the VNG technology on the interior, and EEG electrodes situated along the forehead and the padded face seal, as you can see here. Below, you can see the numerous iterations of prototyping we did on the NeuroXer headset. Every week, we tweaked the design and built another iteration of the headset. On the top left, you can see Jeff with the original headset design. So you can see how far we have come from that point. So project goals: to use the knowledge and insight gained in research to develop the design concept for a concussion assessment headset, which will be further developed into a functional prototype in the future, not within the terms of this summer. And then for 2, the NeuroXer headset, redesign the appearance and optimize the functionality of an EEG headset prototype for use in clinical testing for stroke rehabilitation. And in deliverables and expected impact, from the basis of research and design concept for the concussion headset, and once it's fully developed, there will be full integration of EEG, VR, eye tracking technology together into one device for a novel, controlled method for visual testing combined with monitoring of brain activity. And this would allow for a vastly quicker and more accessible way to evaluate and diagnose concussions, as opposed to MRI or CT scans. This has a huge impact and would be a great application in healthcare, namely in sports medicine, but also for other common causes of concussions being like falls or car accidents. And with the redesigned IUCRC headset, which is now optimized and will be creating multiple functional prototypes, it will be used for bench testing, then clinical testing at Memorial Hermann, and then it will be patented and can be further developed into an actual brain-computer interface product solution to rehabilitate stroke patients. Good.
Thank you.
Questions?
Any questions?
All right.
I'm going to take this minute to take a picture of everybody. Can you all turn on your cameras? Cameras on. Quick picture.
I can.
Somebody else, Pri, and Iman. Let me see.
No, I can't hear.
Okay, I'm going to take a, please check, see me. See the camera? Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, picture taken.
Jenny, I have a question, if I
Yeah,
can.
okay. Go ahead, no worries.
Yeah, so great design, great work. Actually, I'm curious about one aspect. So in the design that you currently have, there is this section of electrodes which is kept on the motor cortex, right? And I understand it's specific to the project. I'm curious, is it, from the design perspective, is it very hard to make something that is rotatable, like that particular aspect? Like, what you, like, just like a headphone, right? Is it like turnable where
it's not turnable?
No, I'm just wondering,
Oh,
in overall, like, and in other separate design, is that too hard to implement from your from your understanding?
I don't think it would be too difficult. It's certainly possible. Just you'd have to have like a rotating joint on the headband that goes laterally. You know, it's certainly doable. I mean, it's a little bit complicated mechanically, but it should be perfectly doable.
Okay, cool. Because I could see that, I mean, for a specific application, this is great, but if you can sort of change it to different positions, the same headset could be used for different applications. Thought that might be very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, I have a question. This is for now. So nice work. My simple question is, so you say the FDA approved material, right, for 3D printing?
Yes.
Right. So my question is, where did you get this printed? Here on UFH or somewhere else? Where's the printer or high quality stuff, right?
I have 6 printers at home, but the material we're using is called Tallman Nylon 910. It's FDA approved for skin contact and food contact. And then we're also using a FDA approved medical grade resin from Formlabs that I'm using on my SLA printer. Yeah.
Okay. So it's a personal printer.
Yeah.
Okay.
All of them
Awesome.
are personal printers.
Nice.
Okay, it's 12:50. Thank you very much, David. We're Ryan Melgar from University of Houston.
For the focus of my REU experience centered around an intervention to falls by robotic orthosis. I had the privilege of working with Chris Malaya, who was my mentor, and Dr. Charles Lane. So specifically, we worked with scalp EEG monitoring to detect balance loss that can then be used to identify patterns and activate wearable devices to prevent falls. And the focused need and industrial relevance of this technology is that similar endeavors cannot be understood because falls are more than a common occurrence. They're the leading cause of injury, hospitalization, and death in the elderly population of America. To such a great degree, in fact, that it results in a heavy economic burden of $31 billion in Medicare costs alone. And aside from that economic burden, these falls often result in heavy quality of life impacts, as they can limit social engagements and spur further physical declines and isolation that can bring depression and feelings of helplessness. And so ultimately, they can take a person's autonomy away. And with the numbers of Americans aged 65 and older expected to nearly double to 52 million in 2018 to 95 million in 2060, these occurrences will become even more frequent. And so reducing the risk of falling and preventing these fall injuries by preventative measures such as by the exoskeletons, this will cause the economic burden to lessen and for older adults to maintain quality of life and independence. And so our project objectives were to specifically determine if repeated exposures to postural perturbations modify the biomechanical and neuromuscular responses. And so we did this because before EEG monitoring can even be used to detect balance loss, first a baseline has to be established. And so this is quite important to establish because these patterns cannot be analyzed if repeated perturbations continuously result in irregular responses. And so a baseline for which balance loss can be detected, for which, let's say, an exoskeleton can detect a fall that's impending, has to be established. In other words, it's necessary to correlate EEG patterns with motor sensor information during balance loss. So our project goal was to hope that by researching these responses to postural perturbations, scientists and engineers can develop a device that would then more accurately use neurological signals obtained with EEG to predict falls and activate a robotic exoskeleton in advance of an impending fall. For our research methods, we used 7 healthy individuals with who were exposed to 2 blocks of 16 backward postural perturbations. The patients were informed of the amplitude and velocity of the perturbations, but not of the onset. 2 tests identified center of pressure and the EMG of the 4 group of muscles, the tibialis anterior, the medial gastrocnemius, the lateral gastrocnemius, and the soleus. The data from 200 milliseconds prior to perturbations and 700 milliseconds after was used to evaluate postural response. To start with, the EMG data of 7 subjects were compared using block 1 and block 2. As you can see, block 1 is in red and block 2 is in black. On the x-axis is the total duration of the response measured from 0 to 1 second. So the main result to see here is the pattern of response. And so if we look across the 7 subjects, we can see that the pattern is, for the most part, synonymous across all 4 muscles and seems to show that repeated exposures do not modify the neuromuscular response. The peaks and the hills of the response seem to mirror each other. And that's what we're looking for in establishing a baseline. So we can be sure that there's no irregular responses among different subjects. Now, looking at the COP data, the COP data is important to establish postural response. So this is the more of the biomechanical portion of the test. It's important to establish this because this is testing neuromusculars, and we want to check if perturbations cause any difference in stance of the subjects. And so again, we can see this mirrored in COP, where the responses don't seem to deviate significantly across all 7 subjects. So knowing this, so the deliverables of this project include the knowledge that repeated exposures to a fixed but temporally unknown perturbation did not substantially alter either the neuromuscular or biomechanical response. The importance of this is that responses seem to be similar in different people. And so this means that building a robotic device that can be applied to various groups of people seems more possible. So identifying brain patterns that continuously shift and are unique for each person would mean that a conclusive balance loss signal may not be obtained, and observing EEG signals that could precede impending falls would become even more difficult. And so with this information, neuroscientists can identify patterns of brain electrophysiological activity preceding impending falls and use this information to activate fall preventing robotic exoskeletons. Thank you.
Okay, any questions? We have 2 minutes.
Yeah, this is Pranav again. Nice work. My question is, so you had 2 blocks, 16 perturbations each, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Or total 16 across 2 blocks.
So yes, total 16 backward postural perturbations.
So 8 in 1 block. Now, I'm just curious to see whether you guys looked at responses for each trial versus just taking an average across blocks. I think this is an average across all trials within a block, and that gives you the black line and the red line, right?
So it's average between 4 muscles in each subject. So there's 7 subjects, 4 muscles, and each subject is exposed to 16 postural perturbations, and that gives you the average for 1 muscle of 1 subject. And so that's.
And then, okay. So what did you look at each trial and then average? So instead of just grouping all trials together for 1 subject and then taking the average across subjects, is there a different trend? That's that's what I'm wondering. Is there a different trend you see if you look at?
So is there an average
wise?
across all 7 subjects?
Yeah, if you have, no, but so within a block, let's say you have subject number 1, within a block, you have 16 trials or 8 trials, whatever, it doesn't matter. But the thing is, did you look at each trial individually, like how the EMG patterns change in that block? And then you have another block?
Yes, yes.
And then,
so that's why we differentiated between block 1 and block 2, because we looked at each block and the average of those blocks and compared them. Okay,
but within each block, you have multiple trials that I think has not been checked, I guess, how they differ across trials.
I think what Dr. Parikh is suggesting is that most likely the very first trial is going to be the most affected because it's completely unexpected, and then the second, the third might be lesser response or different response, right? So yeah. What he's suggesting is just compare, say block 1. First trial versus the second versus the third, and see whether there is any change. I guess that's your question, right?
Yeah, so within a block, just compare first trial to second to third to fourth. Do you see a learning or something, a change?
Okay, yeah.
How that looks different? Because right now it is not substantial when you just average all trials. But if you look at those trials, yeah. All right, good stuff. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes. Hello, my name is Kennedy Leonard. I'm from Johns Hopkins University, and over the summer, I've been working in a lab at U of H with Dr. Parikh and Nishant. And so the focus of my study is going to be, or the focus in the study for me is going to be sample entropy, more specifically the structure of sample foot center of pressure during variability during balance control. And so the reason why we study this is because specifically in stroke patients, there's a higher risk of them falling. And this is due to, the reorganization of the brain, and just cortical control is it's very much impaired post-stroke. And so a lot of the current interventions they have right now include like physical therapy and other therapies, and they're considered to be ineffective. And so the hope in this study is that we can gain more knowledge about how the brain reacts. And we also need to understand a lot of the mechanisms that underlie poor balance. And so one of these mechanisms is the center of pressure, and that's what I'll be talking about. So our hypothesis is that the structure of the foot center of pressure variability will exhibit increased complexity post-stroke versus healthy control, So just basically the fluctuations in the foot center of pressure are going to be more irregular. And more irregular will also mean that there will be an increased value for sample entropy when compared to healthy controls. So basically, to do this, we have so far tested 4 stroke survivors and 1 healthy control. And we do a continuance balance task, and they have 3 levels. We have a low difficulty level, a medium difficulty level, and a high difficulty level. And we repeat that in the same order 3 times for 9 full trials. And they stand on a platform. And basically, I think it'd be better if I just showed you. This would be the platform. And as you would put more pressure, say, towards the front, the platform, in order to make it more difficult, would move in a way that is either less than how you would think it would move in reaction to your pressure, or it's more, or it could be completely opposite. So it could be pushing back on you. And so this, basically, when we vary this, it makes the difficulty of standing still and upright much higher. We also use EMG, and we put them on various muscles in the legs and the biceps of the arm, just to see how the muscles contract and how they use muscles while they're trying to maintain their balance. And then we have EEG, which is 64 channel, goes over the whole head, and it measures brain activity during the task. So the reason that we're studying sample entropy, especially versus standard deviation, is that if you see, here I can zoom in. If you see in these charts, what we're really looking for is the structure of the variability. And so you see this row, the first row here, these 2 graphs each have the same standard deviation. But when you look at how the structure of the graph is, this one is much noisier. And this one is more regular and smooth. And so, but their standard deviations are the same. So you wouldn't know that. But their entropy, this one has a much higher entropy than this one. This one's almost 0. And so that's how we would look at that. And if you go down the column, you can see that these are the same amount of noisiness. So their entropy is all the same, but their standard deviation is different. And so sample entropy is non-linear, and standard deviation is a linear form of measurement. And so sample entropy is much better for this, because we really just want to know the structure. And then in the preliminary results, you can see that as we've hypothesized that the patient, they have much higher complexity, because the sample entropy numbers are higher. And the lower the sample entropy numbers, the more regular the sway is, and the more regular the variability of center of pressure is. What you can also see is that trials number 3, 6, and 9 are the hardest trials. And you can see that in both the patient and the healthy control so far, we haven't tested the full amount of people, but you can see that there's dips in the sample entropy, which makes for more regular sways. And they find those tasks pretty difficult. But we're planning to get 10 people for each group. And we're hoping that this can help us understand the center of pressure, complexity. And so that way, as we study it, we can study, why this is throwing them off, why, especially when we connect it to EEG signals. An important thing I forgot to mention is that the participants have their eyes closed. So they cannot see their surroundings during this whole task. But the hope would be that since there are a lot of therapies out there that are not as good or that just don't seem to be helping as much, that we can just for now understand more, and then hopefully with a better understanding we can create new therapies and new interventions that really help stroke patients increase their independence and help them with their balance. And that's all.
So can I ask a question?
Yes.
Yeah, so if I understood you correctly, when the task becomes more difficult, both sets of or groups of, well, the two people you have become less complex, right? Their
Yes.
pattern. So do you have an explanation for why that would be? I mean, sort of intuitively, if you think, oh, the easier task, they would become more regular.
Yes.
So this is somewhat intuitively backwards to me. So, but I'm assuming there's a reasonable explanation. So I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
So basically what previous literature has said is that I guess the way I would think about it, I don't know too much about this, or I'm not an expert in it, but I would think that if you have a more regular sway, when something's challenging you, you're not reacting in a way where you're obviously, thrown off, or it's very challenging. Basically is what I'm trying to say is that I would think you would expect more regular, in that I'm having such a hard time.
That was totally unfair.
Yeah.
And so Pranav can actually.
I can help you.
Yes.
So the understanding is that that was a good try, Kennedy, but I guess you're close. What I would say is when the difficulty of the task goes up, it is common to see a reduction in sample entropy that becomes more regular. And the argument they make is it's because they pay more attention. So attention, focus, everyone, more cognitive load, and then they just all become all similar, but there is a reduction. It becomes more regular now. Now you see that for the third trial, which is the first time they encounter the high difficulty, you see a drop. But for the second time they do it, trial number 6 and trial number 9, it doesn't happen similarly. There's a different trend. Now, we just don't want to overinterpret the data because we only have one individual analyzed so far, but it is a different trend. As they go through this low, medium, high, low, medium, high, low, medium, high, the second and third time they get high, it's a different kind of behavior. So that is something new that we are seeing.
Right, but that's interesting because that implies that they, even though they've had a stroke, they actually have the capability,
right?
If in fact this interpretation is correct, that they apply more attention to the task.
Yes.
Right. So,
at least for the first time.
Right.
Then eventually, if you see that it's more flat for them from medium to high, while the older group still go down for the second high and the third high. But the stroke patients, they kind of stay flat, which is just one subject data.
Right. Right.
But I have a suggestion.
Just interesting.
I have a suggestion. You might want to look at the entropy as a function of time to see when in time you start to see differences, right? In terms of the perturbation, right? So I have done that for our movements in the past.
Right.
And you start to see changes before you actually can become obvious, on the kinematics, right?
True.
Right.
So right now we're looking at the entire 20-second trial, which is one trial is 20 seconds long. So we are taking the entire window. But I think what you're suggesting is maybe go for a smaller windows and see whether you see.
Well, a running window, actually, really a running window.
Yeah.
to see how the entropy is actually changing as the perturbation time approaches and after that.
So one thing, Pepe, with sample entropy that we figured that there are certain parameters that needs to be optimized, and one of the important one is the length of the window you're taking to compute sample entropy. So it has to be reliable enough. I think we have found is, correct me, Nishan, if it's like 600 data points at least or 700 at least to get a reliable sample entropy. So you can do those kind of windows and then see how that changes as we approach the perturbation or where the instability goes really high.
I mean, that would depend on the sampling frequency, but you can say you have 600, you can, you know.
Can keep moving that,
Yeah, keep doing that so you don't lose the resolution in time. And you track the change.
Absolutely.
And just one important point here in the plot that I would like to mention is that the data we have is for people who are age 60 or above. So even the healthy control data we have is for the older adult. And with aging, we have a trend that the entropy values, the complexity reduces. So although as Pranav said, like it's just one person's data so far for healthy control, it would be a far-fetched thing to overinterpret it.
Just one thing on that too. So the sample entropy, I remember working with it a few times, like a couple of years back. I remember approximate entropy definitely had the window size issue. Like you should the optimized window size. Sample entropy sort of was a much more robust measure with the smaller window size. So as Pepe said, maybe sample entropy might not be too bad with the moving window. I vaguely remember it was robust for smaller windows too. But
so the thing is, I think compared to approximate entropy, the sample entropy does have an improved robustness, but still it does require at least like 600 to 700 samples for reliable estimate. And why this is important for neurocom data is that neurocom sampling frequency is 100 hertz. And for a perturbation like this, which lasts for like 20 seconds, all we have is like 2000 samples. So with a 700 point long window, we might have like 3 or 4 time points to look at, which is still not bad, I would say. It would still give us a good temporal assessment of how entropy changes within a trial.
Yeah,
so that's a great suggestion.
I think that's well. So I also think what Pepe said about the sampling frequency might also play, like the regularity of the signal would play into the actual length of the window, maybe.
Right. I mean, given the COP changes with respect to continuous balance task as opposed to like a fixed perturbation, the sampling frequency is in a acceptable range, like 100 hertz. But as you mentioned, like if we have like a higher frequency, it's surely helpful.
Thank you.
Michael Lean, he's from Stony Brook University.
So hi everyone, thank you all for listening to me speak today. Today I'm going to be talking about a specialized technique called non-invasive facial electromyography. I'm sure most of you used it in your own experiments, but for our lab, we're using it to determine emotional response in patients and detecting specifically emotional valence and arousal, which I'll describe in a moment. So before we begin, I think that we should talk about emotion and what that really means. So you can quantify emotion or just even think about it in its basic state as a state of feeling or a state of, I don't know, I would call it like an affective state, how you feel on a certain time or moment in response to a stimuli. And so in social conversations, when we're talking to someone, emotion recognition is a very important part about detecting other people's emotions and then appropriately responding to it. So for example, say that you have a crying baby, for instance. Maybe he's crying because he dropped an ice cream. So that's why he's sad. So his emotion could be sad. So an appropriate response from a social being, such as us, would be to probably give the child an ice cream and he'll be happier. Similarly, what we can do is have a computer help out with this type of emotional response. So instead of just detecting that the baby's crying, we can also apply this to something called affective computing, where we can have, say, music play on so that the baby would stop crying. Maybe it's playing Baby Shark so the baby will stop crying. And you can even apply this type of emotion recognition and appropriate response to other different types of applications as well. So say that you're coming home from a late, long day of work and you're so tired you might want to fall asleep onto the bed. So a computer could probably detect your emotion at that time and dim the lights. Or if you're in like a medical facility, perhaps you need a patient who needs some medication. So they can detect the emotion and apply the correct dosage based off that amount. So having this type of affective computing and understanding people's emotions would better improve the human-computer interaction between, say, yourself and, who knows, like Elon Musk's Neuralink. So this type of emotion or affective state can be quantified in what's called an arousal valence space. So valence is thought of as the positivity or negativity of an emotion, while arousal is like the intensity, so calm versus exciting or inciting. And when you experience emotion, you've all probably felt that your body is changing. So when you're angry, you tend to clench your face up or you tend to turn red. So these types of emotions can be expressed physiologically. And this could be like facial muscles as well. So when you're near a dog, you tend to smile, and when you're sad, you tend to frown. So facial muscles convey a lot of information about your emotions. And one of the ways that you can use these types of muscle contractions and observe this type of information is using electromyography. So electrodes placed onto your skin that detects the electrical signals that's propagating through it. So our goal in our lab was to record these types of EMG signals and throw it into a machine learning algorithm to properly quantify or identify the emotional response that a person might be having based off of their muscle activity. So our first thing to note is that we tried using a publicly available data set to acquire our data. So one publicly available data set is called DEEP, Database for Emotion Analysis using Physiological Signals. And what happened in that type of data set was the experimenters had 32 participants who watched 41-minute excerpts of music videos. So a patient or a subject would be sitting down, listening to a music video, and then filling out what's called a SAM, or self-assessment mannequin, which essentially is just a slider that goes over valence, arousal, and dominance of how they felt in reaction to that music video. So for instance, if you were listening to one song, after you finish that song, you would see a SAM for valence, which would be on a continuous scale of 1 to 9. So you would talk about how you think you're feeling at that moment based off the positivity and negativity. So you can go 9 for like really positive and 1 for very negative. And you would repeat the same steps for arousal and then other emotional characteristics that we weren't particularly interested at the time. So to just gauge this type of emotional response within this data set, I have a heat map over here that shows the patient's reactions to each and every single one of these music videos. So as you can see, there's kind of a parabolic curve. However, there's still some more studies and statistical tests that we can use to analyze it. But it seems that for the most part, this data set evoked a lot of emotional reactions for high valence, high arousal. So possibly like very happy emotions that are very strong. So if we wanted to get more accurate data, perhaps what we could do is collect our own data and have more music videos or perform a similar experiment that focused more on low valence, low arousal, since it seems to be lacking in this section. So now that I described a bit of the data set, I think it's a good idea to talk about what we're currently doing about that data set. So like these data sets have physiological information, EMG readings, EEG readings. So what are we doing with those readings? So we're focused on EMG, so muscle activity, electricity, remember that. So the DEEP data set recorded only the zygomachus, which is around your cheek area, and then the trapezius muscle, which is, say, around your shoulders, which are both known to convey emotional data whenever you're feeling an emotion. So they have a pre-processed EMG data that held over 1280 trials, so for all the experiments. And from those trials, we were able to differentiate or categorize these types of valence and arousal values in this plot over here. So if they had a high valence and high arousal, that would be HVHA. And similarly, if they had low valence, low arousal, it would be in this corner. So there are 4 categories. Now, this project is still interim, meaning that we are still working on it. So what we currently have tried, and this is a very wrong confusion matrix if you guys know what this is, but essentially what we tried to do was we normalized all the data and performed a 70-30% training testing split, meaning that 70% of the trials were used for training our algorithm and 30% were used for testing or predicting our algorithm to see how accurate it is. And we used support vector machine and got accuracy values of 0.376. But like I said before, this is still in progress. So our current confusion matrix says that our algorithm could detect only high valence, high arousal values, which is definitely not true because as we've seen over here, we have tons of other information in different arousals and valence regions. So this is something that we plan on working on in the future. But after we do this type of experimentation, what we also want to do is focus on a separate experimental design using facial EMG. So this time, instead of using the deep data set to get our EMG data, we are thinking about using other parts of the muscle. So remember over here in this picture, deep used zygomachus, so like cheek, and then trapezius. But we found that in current literature, a lot of people use instead zygomachus and corrugator, which is basically almost like your eyebrow. So when you're frowning, that corrugator supercilii muscle would be tense. So in this new experimental design that we plan on using in the future, what we plan on doing is using something similar to what an MIT mixed media group used, which was called the Klein's method of synthic cycles. So what happens in this type of experiment is that subjects will be prompted with this whole 25-minute sequence of emotions that's based off of the emotion on screen. So for instance, they'd be sitting in a chair like me right now, and on their computer screen or TV screen, they would say the words no emotion. So they would try to act out with no emotion. And then, of course, thank you. And so they would keep going on and on with anger, hate, and try to act it out. And those recordings would be all monitored using EMG. And then after we get all that data, we plan on doing something similar to what we did with DEEP, using SBM and random forest to calculate or categorize our classification algorithms and effective states. So I just want to finish off with the brief conclusions of what I just spoke in all of that 10 minutes of nonsense. Hopefully it wasn't nonsense. Yeah, so we're saying that emotional response that you're feeling could be measured using non-invasive EMG, so muscle activity. And that could be identified in positivity, so valence, and intensity, which is arousal. And then we're thinking about doing this experiment continued to zygomachus, trapezius data, and then corrugator supercilii. And if we play with different features and classification algorithms, we should be able to come up with a more accurate model for effective computing to improve human-computer interfaces. Yep, that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, so now it's with Muhammad Rafat.
Do we have time for a question?
Okay, oh, go ahead. Oh,
yeah,
1 minute.
Yeah, thank you. Nice presentation. So we actually started a new project on the same topic, but not using EMG, but using video images. And yeah, I think it might be interesting to have a joint meeting to see how we can harness each other information. and so you're using a database out there. We are planning to actually collect data, and so there might be an opportunity if Dr.
I would love to.
Yeah,
I would love to, but I'm upstate in New York, so that's very far away.
No, yeah, but it can be done here by some people, right?
Oh yes, that's
right.
true too.
it's just, so as we collect the data, you know, if somebody, doctors he would like to take charge of the EMG, maybe we can collect both EMG and, you know, a video, right, high resolution video, because we are using images for doing the emotion recognition and other things. Right? Anyway, no, I thought I would tell you that.
Hi, Dr. Vidal.
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing this up. I will definitely talk to Dr. Rose about this one and let her know.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. So,
Thank you.
okay, Akshay, have a question? Yeah.
Just one, if I have time. So, Michael, one question. The confusion matrix definitely seems like it's always one class, right? So,
Yeah.
did you do multi-class like SVM, or like did you figure out a way to do that? Because by default it is a binary model, right?
Yeah, so when I initially tried to do SVM, I did realize it was binary. So at the time of the presentation, I put in my binary classification. But currently on my Python script, I try to account for multiple SVM, but I'm still trying to figure that out.
Okay, yeah. I feel like that could be why it's showing always one class at this point. Yeah.
Yes, we are also thinking of considering other different types of neural networks. So I think ANN and then random forest, because we think they may be more powerful than SVM in terms of classification as well.
Yeah, all the best. Thank you.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Sufyan Rafakat, and I'm going to be presenting on the detection of varying pain signals through the analysis of skin conductance data. So skin conductance data is gathered using by measuring conductivity, the difference in conductivity between two different areas of skin. This information can be useful because it can display information such as cognitive stress, sympathetic nervous system activity, or detect pain, and that has many uses for industry, especially in the health sector, because especially for patients who are unable to communicate effectively, this can be used to see the level of pain that they are feeling, or maybe where the pain is being felt, or other different types of information that they may not be able to communicate effectively. Pain itself causes an emotional response, which changes the arousal levels of the body to deal with the stress of that pain. And in like the skin conductance changes in response to the pain stimuli that the body is feeling, and that itself contains information that can be recorded and then analyzed for diagnosis. Other uses also include long-term monitoring, and due to the simplicity of the method of recording skin conductance data, this can be used for attaching simple machines that maintain monitoring for long periods of time, and then notify health officials when severe fluctuations in the skin conductance data are noted, allowing for like swift action to be taken, especially in case of mental illness where the stress or the different causes of that skin conductance changing could lead to life-threatening situations. The experimental setup of what we did was we conducted the experiment on 23 participants with the age range of 19 to 34 years old, evenly split more or less between males and females. And data itself was recorded using electrodes attached to the two separate fingertips in the non-dominant hand. What this would allow is that due to the high, I guess, sweat, like how high fingertips are when sweating, it would allow for easy to gather skin conductance fluctuations, allowing for easy data recording. Stimulation electrodes were also attached to the dominant forearm, so the opposite side, and they are what would be used for the stimulation of the pain. So as instructions were given, the baseline skin conductance data was recorded, and it was considered level 0. So no pain or electric shock being administered. And then 40 different stimuli were set up, like of varying levels of pain, from 1 to 10, and different frequencies and amplitudes of the stimulation being applied. And then these were then applied over 10 to 30-second intervals. And as the for the period of the 30-second, the participant would report how much or how strong the pain level was. So whenever the stimulation occurred, the participant would report the level of pain, and the corresponding skin conductance data would be gathered. This was similar to another experiment conducted by the lab, where instead of using electrical stimulation, auditory stimulations were used as the stimuli. And so, for example, like a gunshot or like loud sounds or oddballs were used as the stimuli. And in response to that stimuli, the participant would feel like have an emotional response, and then their skin conductance data would change. An example based on the data set recorded for the auditory stimulation is this figure below, which shows the changing of the skin conductance data, with the black line being the stimuli and the corresponding curve being the skin conductance response as recorded. So the basic reason that this data was able to be analyzed is because we were able to split the different components of the skin conductance data, which were the fast components such as the phasic, and the slow variations, which were the tonic component. Noise was also taken into account, such as the fidgeting of the participant or various signals that may have affected some of the data that was recorded. So the importance of these components is the fast variations reflect sympathetic nervous system activity, and second order differentiation was used to analyze and to then display the activity, with the input variables being the rise and decay times, or how long it took the skin to, or the conduction of the skin to change and then decrease again. The slow variation, the tonic, were measured with thermal regulation and reflected the general arousal. So it took for prolonged periods of time, due to it being a prolonged effect, it would take a little longer to be displayed. This itself was modeled using a cubic B-spline function with the fixed variables such as decay time and knot size being set to 6 seconds. Optimization itself was done using sparse recovery and system identification methods, which were solved using a coordinate descent approach. And what this means is that it optimized the results after several runs and picked the result which returned the lowest least square error between the observed and constructed signal, which is to an extent modeled using this figure below, whereas the two the constructed and the observed signals were measured, and the optimization was done. The smallest difference between the two was then used as the result and was recorded. So my personal objectives and project goals were to design an experiment for reliable detection of the event-related response, and this is actually still an ongoing project because we joined a little late. I also was in charge of completing an IRB proposal based on the designed experiment and getting approval from the University of Houston's Institutional Review Board, and then sufficient and reliable skin conductance data would then need to be recorded using the experimental design. Overall, the goal of the project is to reliably detect the skin conductance data in response to various different stimuli. So our focuses are the pain and auditory stimulations. But how this project could be built upon and explored further is comparing our results to state of the art, and then applying the methods of recording and then the analysis methods to real world scenarios. For example, using the devices and the recording measures in real world situations where patients are hooked up to the electrodes and their skin conductance data is recorded as they're being diagnosed, which could aid in effective diagnosis and maybe tell part of the story that the patient themselves aren't able to effectively communicate. I think that's it.
Sofia Alvarado from University of Houston.
All right, my presentation is going to be a little bit different because I'm not as technical as everyone else is. So my name is Sofia Alvarado. I was interning with the Brain Center's Program Management Center of Communications kind of situation. My mentor was Jenny, and my faculty advisor was Dr. Contreras. And so what we did was basically I had to look for something that I could focus on over the summer and, fix it or improve it. And so what I focused on over the summer was actually the communication between the Brain Center and the public. So, well, the public and, our faculty and our students and everyone involved. But the idea was basically create a newsletter that would contain all of the events of like what's going on in the Brain Center. So that was kind of the need. The need was, yeah, so we just wanted to make sure that all of the research that you guys have been doing is actually being presented to the public in such a way that, people are aware of what's going on and people want to learn more about what's going on. And hopefully it brings in more, I'm spacing on the word right now, but basically what I'm hoping this newsletter does is that I hope it in more funding and, more man, I'm spacing out on that word. I'm so sorry.
More impact.
I'm working on it. So as far as project objectives go, so we all know what the brain does. We all know that, the Brain Center is really here to, do all these projects that are going to innovate in the world of, neurotechnologies and things like that. And so basically the newsletter is supposed to kind of represent that in its own way. So actually you'll see here a screenshot of the first page of the newsletter. It has like a lot more to it, but I actually created this from scratch. It was really fun. It was one of those things where, you had to figure out like, what does a newsletter look like? You had to figure out like, who should you talk to? What should you resemble? So this wasn't part of a template that was there. So I actually did this on my own. I just looked at a bunch of templates and I put it all together. And then as far as like research methods go, what I did was I did a lot of interviews, a lot of, just kind of basic one-to-one talk with people, about what was going on, about the events, more information about the students themselves and like their projects, so that I could add it into the newsletter. So the projected goal was, or the project goal, I should say, was simply just to create a easy way for the public to interact with Brain. And the newsletter is that the intention of the newsletter is simply to make that information easily accessible. Because, you know, a lot of the times we, you know, you, the students, are going to be in the labs, you guys know what's going on, you know what your projects are for, but, you know, other people might not know. And that's a part of what we need to kind of bridge the gap. So that is, yeah, so I mean, I worked, oh yeah, I remembered what I was going to say. So the last thing I wanted to mention was, so as far as the newsletter's initial success, we just issued the first issue, so the first publication, and it was a great success. We actually were able to put in a lot of the stuff that's going on about the REU. There's still stuff that we want to put in the next issue, but it was a lot of information. We got, you know, all of you on there, so, you know, you can see your smiling faces, and everyone's included. I mean, I worked really hard on trying to get every single little detail right. Jenny was with me the entire time. She saw the struggle, but we did it. And so I'm hoping that, you know, as the initial success continues, and, you know, as we continue that, we're able to share this newsletter with other people, and, you know, to show them like, hey, this is going on with Brain Center, like this is our time. And yeah, that is what I did as far as like project summary goes.
Thank you, Sophia. So this newsletter has been sent to everyone already?
Yes, I think it should happen.
All the lists that we have, the Brain Center, faculty, students, REU trainees, everybody. That's good. Yeah. So I guess we have now a template, right?
Yes.
So, yeah. No, we appreciate your work. I mean, communications is really important. You never know what's going to be the next donor or person that could benefit from our activities. And so this is really, really important. I appreciate the time you spend on that.